Hello, and welcome back to Redmont. In this week's episode, I'm going to be continuing the suburban expansion into the countryside surrounding the city of Redmont. From this point forward, I'm mostly going to be focusing on what the developments of the city are going to be like after, from say the mid 20th century forward to the present day. So that's going to mean a lot more urban sprawl. That's also going to mean densification of certain sections of the city and the addition of industry and businesses and all the sort of stuff that sort of would have developed in the second half of the 20th century moving forward. Of course, I've already built many modern buildings in Redmont. I think the goal of this series was always to use history as sort of a guide to determine how the city develops. It's not necessarily about creating a historical reenactment of a developing city. It's more about establishing the reasons why the city is the way it is, why it's here, and how it came to be. Now that the city is at a point of, say, the mid 20th century, it's time to think about what development after that point would look like, and it's really just a lot of rapid development and a lot of rapid expansion, and that's what's going to be happening over the next few episodes. But before I get into that, I did have a viewer ask last week about the photo settings I'm using for the game, and here they are. I'm only changing a few settings here. Of course, all these settings are subjective, but what I found that works for me is increasing the exposure, the contrast, the saturation. The biggest change was with the white balance, keeping the temperature at 0. I find the neutral color temperature looks better to me than any other white balance setting here, so that was important. Also, just bumping up the shadows so they're not quite so dark. It just helps increase the brightness of everything, and that's all I'm really doing. And with that, let's get on with the episode. For this week's episode, I'm going to be mostly focused on building out this area of the city right down here. It's hard to see from this angle, but there's a substantial change in elevation in this part of the city. If we turn on the contour lines, we can take a look at it. It's hard to see it from here, but if you were, say, driving in from Honeybrook, what you would notice when you're approaching Redmont would appear way down, nestled down in a valley along the river. So I have to kind of account for the increasing elevation here. Of course, with city skylines, the game doesn't handle elevation very well, at least building on elevations. The first thing I'm going to be doing here is there's a little country back road that I want to establish, kind of snaking through this little valley here. This will be a back road up to Honeybrook. This isn't meant to be a main road or anything like that. It's really windy and slow, so there isn't going to be a lot of traffic on here, but that is the back road between Honeybrook and Redmont. I will be replacing this alleyway I used here to draw out the road with a country road that won't have streetlights on it. Streetlights aren't very appropriate, but as you can see, if you get down really close, you can't really see Redmont from this angle. And that's kind of the whole point. With the rapid expansion, there's going to be a lot of demand for residential housing, and there's not going to be a lot of places to build it, so the city is going to start to have to build up into the hillsides. And I'm going to be imagining this as typical suburban residential developments that were built, say, during the 1970s and 1980s. Because the game isn't really good at building on hillsides, at least not in the way like real houses would be built in the real world, we have to do a few alterations here. So I'm going to be leveling out the terrain. I'm going to be making a series of terraces. What I'm trying to do here, the objective is to make sections here that are appropriate to build on, at least for the game, but also make them in a way that they blend into the hillside and they don't look very obvious. And as you can see from this angle, the changes are really quite subtle, not really all that obvious. And once I get the houses and trees in here, everything will blend in really nicely and look really quite natural. But before I start filling in those neighborhoods, I'm going to switch my attention here to another feature that probably would have appeared during the middle of the 20th century, probably around the 1960s, maybe into the early 70s, and that's going to be a golf course. And for this, I'm going to be using Joe Geske's golf course asset. I'm going to say this right up front. I know nothing about golf. I know nothing about golf courses, so definitely a creative interpretation of a golf course. The great thing about Joe's asset here is everything's contained within the asset. All the fairways are just expansions that you can add wherever you want them. Rather than flattening out the landscape, placing all the fairways and calling it a day, I wanted to try to fit the golf course into this uneven landscape, which is a bit of a challenge here. Now, I didn't place all 18 holes, and the simple reason for that is I just didn't have the space for all 18. I replaced the grass surfaces with something I thought looked a little more appropriate. At this point, this doesn't look all that impressive. The first thing I need to do here is make some small alterations to the landscape, make sure there's no really strange like hills or dips or anything like that. I'm also going to be adding a few water features. I also wanted to add a few features here that make this golf course look really unique to the region. And I thought it'd be really cool if the golf course was built around some natural rock outcroppings here. Of course, these giant boulders are also created by Joe. I'm going to be using the transform tool here to set this boulder on its side. I sort of imagine this as the signature feature for this particular golf course. Because I don't play golf, the thing that stands out mostly for me for golf courses is their locations and settings. The most interesting golf courses take advantage of the landscapes they're located in. So what I was focused on was the terrain around Redmont, what kind of natural features here I could play off of to make this a unique looking setting. I think the easy choice here would have been to put the golf course somewhere along the river, but I thought it might be a little more interesting and fun to try to take advantage of the drier landscapes and the rocky environment here and work with that in some way. All the parts of the golf course come as expansions to the actual building. A problem I was having is once you place these extensions, you can't interact with them. You can't use Move It to move them around or anything like that. So what I ended up doing was using StarQ's advanced building control mod here to turn them into static assets. And the static assets just act as props that I can move in place and position them exactly where I want them to go. Of course, the final step here is to add the bushes and trees. For the areas immediately adjacent to the clubhouse, I'm going to go with some large mature oaks. And as I move away from the clubhouse, I'll switch to smaller bushes and shrubs. Plants that are more suitable to the actual environment here. And of course, like always, when you get to the point where you're starting to add all the vegetation, all the plants and the trees and all that, that's where everything finally starts to tie together. And rather than looking like a collection of random parts, it all starts to read as one unified golf course. And here's the finished golf course. Now, it just happens that the golf course is one of the reasons why we have so much suburban sprawl into the hillsides. Everybody wants to live near a golf course. Usually that would indicate a wealthier neighborhood. In most city builds, that's how you would usually imagine this. I have to keep in mind that Redmont is kind of like a mid-tier city in the United States. It's not going to be a major urban center. And I imagine that the people living near the golf course obviously would have more money, and the property values up in this area would probably be higher. But I don't think that means they're going to be living in luxury mansions either. These are going to look like fairly modest homes for most people. But I think in the context of Redmont, these are definitely going to be perceived by the residents of Redmont, or the people that are a little better off than the people living down in the valley, I suppose. once again, I'm falling behind in my elementary education. Out of all the education tiers there are in the game, elementary is the one I'm having the hardest time keeping up with. I just can't seem to satisfy all the demand. And of course, for the suburban housing, I'm going to be using the Southwest Region Pack residential houses here. They are perfect. They fit the aesthetic perfectly. I've said this before. They definitely have a like 1980s kind of like feel about them. So they're perfect for this sort of development. And we can see here that the residents living up on the hillside here would have really quite stunning views of downtown Redmont. I'm just going to be making a few final adjustments to the landscape. I couldn't help noticing I have this ridge that's sitting directly above the golf course. I started to imagine a 1980s developer coming in here and buying up all the land, solely because it's right next to the golf course. And this sort of represents the more undesirable aspects of suburban sprawl. This is sort of when property values really start to spike and land becomes really valuable. So you can start building houses wherever, regardless of how they fit into the landscape or how they impact the community. This is going to be a kind of a really densely packed neighborhood because there isn't a lot of land up here. It's not going to be nice housing. Well, I mean, it's going to be nice housing, but it's going to be cookie cutter housing. It's going to be all of one housing type. A single developer came in here, knocked out the entire neighborhood within like a year of construction. The people living up here probably have all sorts of problems with their homes. These are the sorts of problems anybody living in a large modern city in North America, we probably all can relate to neighborhoods that look like this. Unfortunately, in creating this neighborhood, I also created a shortcut for the highway traffic to cut across town. So now I also have a lot of heavy trucks driving through residential neighborhoods. Those sneaky little bastards. I'll have to come back here and create a district to restrict traffic to local traffic only. I'm also going to be using this as an opportunity to come back and do a bit of editing here. I still have some remnants of some zoning I did at the very beginning of the city build here, just to jumpstart the city. This is just some straight up vanilla zoning right down here. And this is the reason why I don't like to use zoning and rather hand place all my buildings. You just get all this repetitive housing, all level 5. It all looks really ugly. It doesn't look very natural. So I'm going to come back in here and replace it with the Southwest region pack. Once again, this building style suits the city very well and looks a lot more appropriate. Also, consistent lot sizes. That also is a thing that usually happens in cities. I also didn't want to delete out all the vanilla housing. It's not my favorite style, but it does still add a bit of variety to the housing types in game. So I still want to use a little bit of it. I just don't want to use that much of it. Okay, now I'm going to turn my attention to another unfinished neighborhood within the city here. I think I filled this in probably within the first or second episode. And at that time, I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to build down here. So this is more of a placeholder rather than a finished neighborhood. Now that much of the city around it is being built up, I have a better idea of how this should fit in with the surrounding neighborhoods. So I'm going to come back in here, redraw the streets. Right along the main road there, obviously that's going to be commercial, and then I'll just tuck some residential in behind it. For the commercial strip down here, I'm going to go with fairly standard fare: fast food restaurants, strip malls, and small offices. I'm also short on fire services, so this seemed like a good location to add a fire station. I have a little bit of land right down by the railroad tracks here. It really didn't seem appropriate for much of anything, so what I'm going to do down here is just add a little bit of abandoned industry. Okay, the only step left now is to do the final landscape detailing. I'm going to start with this little neighborhood on the ridge here and work around here in the golf course. I don't really have much to say about this. I've already done quite a lot of this in previous episodes, so I'm just going to shut up and let the music play and get on with working. detailing for this neighborhood is mostly going to be filling in the surfaces around the buildings. This is going to be mostly either gravel or paved surfaces, filling in a lot of the empty lots with parking lots. That seems appropriate for this kind of like commercial sprawl. I'm also going to be adding some decals and props. The decals are mostly there, so when you're viewing these sorts of neighborhoods from a bit of altitude, the surfaces have a little bit more definition to them and they pop a little bit more. They just look a little more visually interesting. Overall, the level of detail here is going to be fairly minimal. Okay, I think that's enough detailing for this episode. There is one final thing I wanted to look at here before I finish this episode, and it's time to start thinking about the expansion of the downtown core of Redmont and what its future is going to look like moving forward. And we're going to be focused here in West Redmont. I think this is where a lot of the newer developments are going to take place. And right here at this intersection is where we're going to start. I'm going to be removing a few of the residential buildings here. I have to remember this for the future to replace these. And I'm starting to think more of terms of what a financial district might look like for the city. And I'm imagining this like 1970s, 1980s. So I have here the Wells Fargo Bank. I believe this is Detective 93 has created this asset. This is a beautiful asset. I love it. It captures the 1980s time period perfectly. I believe the original building was made in 1984. And I think this gives you an indication of where I'm planning to take the development of the city. Redmont is not going to be a super large city. It's like a mid-tier city within the United States. I don't imagine any of the buildings are going to be higher than probably somewhere between 30 to 40 stories, maybe one really high one just to finish off the entire series. But this is kind of an indication of the height of the skyline. This is going to be one of the shorter buildings, I think. There's going to be maybe a couple of taller ones in the Wells Fargo building when I'm done. But I got to start thinking about redeveloping a West Redmont here. I have all this residential housing right off to the left here. That doesn't seem very suitable anymore. So I think over the next few episodes, that's going to start coming out. And I also have several other mid-century developments to add to the city moving forward here. So a lot is going to be happening over the next few episodes. And that brings us to the end of this episode. If you stuck around to the very end, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. If you are enjoying my content, it would help out tremendously if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. As I've said in previous episodes, YouTube is being very difficult about this. It's very difficult to get people to actually see the video anymore. So liking and subscribing is a great way to get the video in front of more eyeballs so people can see it. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Everybody take care, and I will see you all next time. Bye.